completely new types of algorithms. We're going to start talking about algorithms on strings. And I just want to start with a bunch of problems, and we will see many different data structures, and we will use those data structures to solve these problems. So the first problem is a pretty easy one. Let's say I have n strings. Each one of my strings has a length of at most k. And I also have some alphabet. So my alphabet can be, let's say, the English alphabet, or maybe just zeros and ones. So all of these strings are written with this alphabet. And of course, I have an order over the elements in my alphabet, and I want to sort the strings alphabetically. Okay. So this is my first problem. And of course, I can just do a normal sort, right? So let's say I just put all of these strings in an array, and I just do merge sort or any other type of sort. So we've seen that if we do, let's say, merge sort or any other comparison-based sort, we would need n log n comparisons. But the problem here is that each one of my items is actually a string of length k. So here I'm assuming that k is a large number, and n is also a large number. Okay. So if I want to compare two strings of length k, that's going to take OK time. And I need n log n comparisons. So if I do, let's say, a naive sort, this would take O nk log n. I would prefer it if I can do it, let's say, in O nk, because I mean, I have to at least read the strings, right? I would prefer to do much less than this. Okay, so this is my first problem. The second problem, which is actually, as it turns out, a very similar problem, is that I have a set of strings. Let's say originally my set of strings is empty. And again, my strings have a length of at most k. And I want to do n operations. And every operation can either add a new string to the set, or it can just ask, is this particular string in the set or not? So I have an add and a search. This is my second problem. My third problem has the same operations as the second problem, but I have a new type of query, which basically gives me some string p and asks me, is p a prefix of one of the strings in your set? Yes or no? And if there is a string in your set such that p is a prefix of it, how many such strings are there in the set? And which ones are they? So let's say my strings have indices. I can just output the indices of the strings that have p as a prefix. Okay. So this is my third problem. Now, in my fourth problem, I don't have a set of strings. I just have one string s. But my question is, what is the longest repeated substring of s? So what is the longest string that is a substring of s starting at two different indices? Okay. And I can also generalize this. So suppose that I want to find the longest substring that appears at least r times in s. And again, I'm not talking about subsequences here. I'm talking about substrings. So they're going to be contiguous. Okay. And finally, probably the most important problem, problem 5, is that I have one string s in the input, and then I have to answer n queries. And every query just gives me another string t. And the question is t a substring of s? And again, I can generalize this. I can ask, if t is a substring of s, then tell me how many times it appears in s. And also tell me where in s it appears. So give me all the starting indices, such that if I start there in s, I would see a copy of t. Okay. These are the problems we want to answer. Well, we saw basic sorting, but we can also use binary search trees, right? So let's say I just keep a binary search tree of all of my strings. And whenever I want to insert a string, I just do it. So let's say it's also a balanced binary search tree. So it's an AVL tree or any other kind of balancing. And so the height of my tree is O log n. And at every node of my tree, I'm saving a string. And basically, when I was teaching you binary search trees, I said that the only thing we need is some process to be able to compare two of the items. And I can compare two strings, right? So it makes sense to say that a string is smaller than another string. It just means that it comes first alphabetically, right? Or comes before that one alphabetically and so on. So I can just create a binary search tree. For example, if my strings are A, B, C, A, C, D, B, C, E, I can just create a binary search tree. I put A, B, C here, and then A, C, D is bigger than A, B, C, so it goes to the right. And B, C, E is bigger than A, B, C, and it's also bigger than A, C, D, so this one also goes to the right. So this is just a binary search tree. I just have strings. Now, of course, this is not balanced. I could also have the AVL version of this so that I get everything balanced. Now, what happens if I use a balanced binary search tree? Which one of these problems can I solve? Well, I can solve this first problem by just inserting all of my strings into the tree and then printing them in order, right? But this one would give me the same runtime as the naive sort. Because again, I have n log n comparison operations in my binary search tree, and each comparison is now taking OK time. So the runtime is still nk log n. What about here? Well, I have a set of strings. I have n operations, so I have at most n strings in my set. Whenever I'm adding, again, I need log n comparisons to add in a balanced binary search tree, or log n comparisons. But now every comparison is taking OK. So every add takes OK log n. And every search also takes OK log n. Okay. Now, how about this one? If I have a binary search tree of my strings, and then I find some string P, can I figure out what is the number of strings such that P is a prefix of them? Can I like count that or find them just based on the ordering in my binary search tree? So the thing that you have to realize here is that if P is a prefix of S, then P comes before S in the alphabetical order, right? So if I have all of my strings in a binary search tree, and I'm asking, is there a string S that has P as a prefix, then this S should definitely come after P in my order, right? But now I can have, and let's say I just invent a new letter and add it to my alphabet, and let's say that this letter comes after all of the other letters that I had in my alphabet. Okay, let's call this letter, let's say alpha. Suppose I'm using the Latin alphabet and I'm suddenly adding a Greek letter in there. Okay, so then if P is a prefix of S, then S would be bigger than P, but it would be less than P alpha. This is the string P with the character alpha added to the end of it, right? So actually, if I want to see how many strings S have P as a prefix, I'm basically asking how many strings S are between P and P alpha. So this is 2 rank queries on my binary search tree. And again, it takes OK log n, because each one of them takes K log n. And again, the comparison, every comparison is taking OK. So I can answer this in K log n. Let me write it somewhere. So with binary search tree, this is K log n. And these ones are also K log n with the binary search tree. Of course, we want to do better than this, if we can. Okay. How about this one? Given a string S, what is the longest substring of S? And here, let's say that the length of S is K. I'm generally using K in this lecture for the lengths of the strings. Okay. So I can just create a binary search tree in which I add all of the substrings of S. Right? There are n squared substrings of S. So if I add all of them into a binary search tree, the total runtime would be n squared log n times k. I always have the times k for the comparisons. Right? So that's my pre-processing. And then whenever someone gives me a string, I just have to check, is this string in this binary search tree? And that's all k log n. And also I can just count how many times every substring appears and so on. So this part is also fine, but again, really slow. And yeah, so I can figure out if it repeats. I can also answer problem 5 like this, both of them, as long as I just keep a set of all the substrings, right? But of course, the whole point of this lecture is that this is wasteful and it's going to take too much memory and also too much runtime. So we want to do something better. Now, the first thing I would mention here is that I really hate the fact that I had this k appearing in my runtime. Because every time that I was comparing, I had to compare two whole strings, and that took OK time. So all of my runtimes were multiplied by k. So I'm going to have a different data structure, and we call this a ternary search tree. And the idea is very similar to a binary search tree. I always want to compare, and based on the comparison, decide whether I go left or right or so on. But I want to make sure that my comparisons are always on just one character. I don't want to compare whole strings. I just want to compare one character of this string with one character of that string, so that I can say all of my comparisons are done in constant time in O1. Okay. Now, how can I do this? Well, here's an example of a ternary search tree. So I start at the root, and I have one character at the root, in this case, I. So let me just tell you how I search for a string here. Suppose I want to search for a string. For example, I want to search for @. Okay. I say the first character should be A. But the first character at this root is I. So I'm looking for a string that has a first character smaller than I, because A is smaller than. So I just go to the left child. Okay. Now this left child, this B, corresponds to the strings whose first character is B. Okay. But my first character is A. So I need a smaller first character. I'm going to again go to the left. So now this A corresponds to all the strings whose first character is A. I'm happy with this because my first character is A. So as soon as I matched my first character, I go to the second character. So now, remember, this is all the strings whose first character is A. Now I'm going to the second character. This one corresponds to the strings whose second character is S. But my second character is T. T is bigger than S. So I'm going to go to the right, and so on. So generally speaking, the way this works is that, let's say I have indices. So let's say I'm going to start with index 0, whatever. So my index 0 is A, my index 1 is T. So the root always corresponds to index 0. Okay. And I have some character there. So all the strings that have their character at index 0 smaller than this root would be to the left. All the strings that have their first character, character 0, larger than the root would be to the right. But then in this case, we have an equality as well, right? So I might have some strings whose first character is exactly I. That's why I have a ternary tree. Every node has 3 children. So these are the strings whose first character is less than I, the root. These are the strings whose first character is larger than I. And now these ones are the strings whose first character is I. But as soon as I know what the first character is, I'm going to focus on the second character. So now the root here in this subtree S, it corresponds to all the strings whose second character is S. Okay? So in general, every node has 3 children. It has a left child, a right child, and a middle child or an equality child. Okay. And the idea is that if this node is talking about some index, for example, this node is about index 0, then its left child and right child will be about the same index. But its middle child would be about the next index. Okay. So again, this B, it corresponds to all the strings whose character at index 0 is B. So its left child will also talk about strings whose character at index 0 is A. And this is also at index 0. But its middle child is at index 1. So you can continue like this. So this S is actually at index 1. This T is at index 1. This is 1. This is also 1. This is also 1. This is also 1. This is also 1, 1, 1. This is 0. This is 1. Okay. So basically, whenever you're taking the middle child, you're going to the next character, to the next index. But whenever you're taking the left child or the right child, you're doing exactly what you were doing in a binary search tree. That's the idea of a ternary search tree. Okay, so let's create a ternary search tree on these words. So I want to show you how to insert in a ternary search tree, and then I want to show you how to delete and how to search. Okay, so first I start with an empty ternary search tree, and I want to add the word selfish. So I add S. Now at this point, I don't know any of these future words. Okay, so I only know the word selfish at this point. So when I add S, all of my words have S as their first character. So I don't need a left child or a right child. I only need a middle child. So I add a middle child, and we said that whenever we have a middle child, we go to the next character, which is E in this case. And basically, I continue like that. So my first insertion is always like this. Ah, it didn't fit. Okay, so this is selfish. Now I want to add my second word, sell. Now, I compare the first character, I see that it's S. Because it matches, I can now go to the second character. So I take the middle child and go to the second character. It's E. This one also matches. So I take the middle child and go to the third character. It's L. This one also matches. I take the middle child and go to the next character. Now, in the tree, I have F, but in my word, I have an L. So L is bigger than F. So this should become the right child of F. So this is how I add the word sell. Okay. Again, so this is the first character. This is the second, third. This is the fourth character, but then I'm increasing the fourth character to L, basically. That's how you have to see it. Okay. And also, let's say that at every node of my tree, I keep a Boolean to know whether I have a word here or not. Because, for example, I don't have the word SE, right? So I want to have a Boolean, let's say a check mark saying that the selfish was a word and the sell was also a word. Now I want to add self. Again, I start here. S is fine. It matches the first character. So I go down the middle. E matches the second character. I go down the middle. L matches the third character. I go down the middle. F matches the fourth character. So I have a perfect match. I didn't have to add any new nodes. I just have to remember that this is the endpoint of a word. Okay. Now, let's say, so many words. What is this? Is this even a word? Cells, whatever. Okay, so I go S, E, L, and now I go to F, and I see that it doesn't match because I need a Z. So Z is bigger than F. Now I do what I did in a binary search tree. I go to the right. I see an L, but Z is even bigger than an L. So I would just, again, create a right child and add Z here. And I put a check mark to remember that this is the endpoint of a word. And finally, I have selfless. So I just go down here, self, and then I go down one more time. I see that I have an I, but I need an L. L is bigger than I. So I will create a right child L. And then the rest of this is just as before. It's E, S, S. So this is how I would insert. Now, how would you search? Well, when you search, you just do the same thing. Just go down your tree. Every time you don't have a match with your current character, you have to go either left or right, depending on how you compare. And if you do have a match, you just go down the middle. And then you go to the next character, start matching the next character. Okay. What is our runtime? So for example, what is the runtime for a search here? Let's say that I have added all of my n words. And let's say that each of my words has at most k characters. Okay. And now I'm searching for a particular word. And let's say the height of this tree is h. Okay. So you have to decide on two things. How many times would you go left or right? Right? So the number of times that you go either left or right is basically at most the height of the tree. And how many times will you go down the middle? At most k times, because every time that you're going down the middle, you're matching one character. So the total runtime for search is actually OK plus h, where k is the length of the string that you're searching for, and h is the height of your tree. Okay, but then you can see that all of the other operations take the same time as well. So if I want to do an insert, it's basically the same. It's k plus h. If I want to remove something, by the way, removing is super easy. Just search for it and remove the check mark. Right? You don't even have to clear the vertices that you don't need. Just remove the check mark. Okay? So everything is done in runtime OK plus h. So we are in a situation very similar to binary search trees. If I have a balanced ternary search tree where this h is log n, then each one of these operations would just take OK plus log n. Okay? If it's balanced, if the height is all log n. And this is much better than what we had with a binary search tree, because in a binary search tree, each operation took k times log n, but now I'm spending only k plus log n. K plus log n is much better than k times log n, of course. So in a ternary search tree, this is not the famous TST, it's k plus log n. And this is also k plus log n. And this one is also k plus log n, because you can actually do the rank operations as well. Everything is very similar to binary search trees, except that you have to always remember that if there is equality, I just go to the next character. Okay, but this is assuming that we have a balanced ternary search tree. And what I showed you was just a normal ternary search tree without balancing. It turns out you can do rotations on ternary search trees as well. So you can have like the ternary variant of AVL trees. Now, I'm not going to teach that. The rotations are actually very similar to AVL rotations. But all you need to know is that we can make this tree have a height of log n, and then all of these things will work in k plus log n. Okay. It's just that the rotations are more complicated because you have to now keep track of 3 children for every node, and it's just too nasty. Okay. I want to go to the next one. This is my favorite data structure. So let's talk about tries. Tries are also sometimes called prefix trees, are a different way of saving strings. Okay, but before we do that, I just want to say one thing here. What is the main operation that I'm doing in my ternary search tree? It's comparison, but it's comparison between characters. So I'm not assuming that my alphabet is small. I can have a huge alphabet here. For example, my alphabet can just be, let's say 32-bit integers or 64-bit integers. As long as I can compare 2 letters in my alphabet, I can use this. So I can use this to sort also, let's say, vectors of integers instead of just strings. And the good thing here is that I don't really care about the size of my alphabet as long as I can compare two letters of my alphabet in constant time. And I never compare 2 complete strings. But now, from this point onwards, I'm going to assume that my alphabet is small. Okay. So in the previous one, I wasn't assuming this, but from here onwards, I'm assuming that the size of my alphabet is small. And this is actually one of the reasons why I'm going to get better runtimes for all of my algorithms. And this is fine if you're working with, let's say, binary strings, they're just 0 or 1, or if you're working with strings that are written in English and you have 26 letters. Or actually, the main use case is in computational biology and bioinformatics, where they're processing DNA and they have 4 letters. So let's talk about tries. What are tries, or also sometimes called prefix trees? So basically, the idea is that I'm going to save all of these strings, but I'm going to save the strings 1 character at a time. So for example, when I want to save the string cell, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to create a vertex, and it's going to have an edge that is labeled S. By the way, I'm labeling my edges now. You can also label the vertices, it doesn't really matter. And then I create another edge called E, and then another edge labeled L, and then another edge labeled L. So this is how I want to save 1 word. But now the next time, when I want to save the next word, I reuse what I already have. So I start at the same root. So this root corresponds to the empty string. This vertex corresponds to the string S. This vertex corresponds to the string SE. Every vertex basically corresponds to the string that is obtained if you start at the root and go all the way to that vertex. Okay, so now if I want SELF, I already have S, E, and L here. I can just add a new vertex here for F. Okay. Now, if I want to have selfish, I do the same thing. I start here, S, E, L, F, and then I need to add I. Sorry, this F was supposed to be on the edge. And then I add S, and then I add an edge H. Okay. Now, you already see the problem. Just like before, I have to keep track of the ends of my words. Because if I have a try like this, I don't know if the word self is in there or not. So I can just have a marker on each one of my vertices. I can just have a check mark, a Boolean flag, that tells me whether this vertex is the end of a word. But instead of doing that, I can also do something else. I can just, again, add 1 character to my character set, and I can say that this is the end of word character. So every word ends in this character. And I want my end of word character to be smaller than all of my other characters. So if your characters are in ASCII, I would use something like this, like a pound, hash, sharp, I don't know what you call it, but I'll just add this to the end of all of my words. Okay. And now, because every word ends in this character, and because this character only appears at the end of the words, I can easily understand which points are the endpoints of the word, because now my cell becomes like this. My self will actually have this, and then selfish will have another edge with this end of word character. Okay. Now, why did I say that the end of word character should be alphabetically smaller than all of my other characters? Well, because you see, self is a prefix of selfish, and I want self to appear before selfish. So in order for that to happen, this end character should be smaller than I. Right, so that's just a small trick that we play. Now, if I want to add selfless, let's just do this really fast. So I have self, and then, oh, this is hard to, okay, whatever. Let's say I have L, E, and then S, and then S. And then, of course, I also have this sharp at the end. Okay, and let's assume that we don't have the rest of these words. I wasn't thinking when I added this example, this would be too large. You get the idea. So basically, the idea here is that I'm really saving space, because whenever 2 of my words have some shared prefix. For example, self is shared between these two words. I'm going to save that only once. I'm not going to save 2 copies of self. Okay. So actually, this is going to give me some cuts in space. But in the worst case, I might have a bunch of words that don't have any common prefixes, and then I have to save everything. But anyway, this is called a trie. Now, you saw the process of inserting something in the trie. You just start at the top. You keep going down 1 letter at a time. And you insert everything until you get to the end of word character. Now, if you want to search for something, it's exactly the same process. I just start at the top. So let's say I'm searching for whatever, selfie. So let's say I'm searching for selfie and I haven't inserted selfie yet. So I start here, I take the first letter, which is S, and then E, and then L. And then here I know that I have to take F, and then I have to take I. And at this point, I'm looking for an E, but this vertex does not have a child that is labeled E. So that tells me that the word selfie is not here. Okay. And again, remember that when I'm searching, I also add this end of word character to the end. So if I search, for example, for the word just SE, I would start here, S, and then E. I could take all the edges that I was looking for, but then remember, I have an end of word character as well. So here I'm looking for the end of word character, and that doesn't exist. So I say that this word was not in my set. Okay, going back to my problems, let's see. I have n strings of lengths at most k over this alphabet. I want to sort them alphabetically. Well, let's add all of them to a trie. And then when I have this trie, I can print everything alphabetically, right? Just start at the top, and every time take the leaf that has the smallest label. Right? That would give you the first word alphabetically. And then continue doing that. Basically, it's an in-order traversal, except that I just assume that the leaves are in alphabetical, the children of every node are in alphabetical order. Okay? But how much time would this take? Well, I have to basically add n strings. But when I'm adding a string of length k, that's taking only OK time. Because I'm spending constant time for every character. I'm starting at my root. For every character, I'm spending only constant time to either create the node that I didn't have or go to it if that node existed. Okay, so creating it would take O and K, and actually then going over it and printing all of them would also take O and K. You can just analyze that later because we're running out of time. So this is O and K if I use a trie. What about these operations? So again, we have adding and searching. We saw both of them already. Adding a string takes OK time. And the fun point here is that this is independent of the number of strings that we have. So my n is not even appearing in my runtime. But of course, I'm assuming that my alphabet is small, right? So in a trie, adding a string is going to take OK time. And then searching for a string is also going to take OK time, which is now better than all of the solutions we've had until this point, because of course it's better than k plus log n and k. Okay. What about this one? I'm given some string p, and the question is, do I have a string s in my set such that p is a prefix of s? Well, the nice point about a prefix tree or a trie is that basically every node here corresponds to a prefix of one of my strings, right? So for example, if you look at the string selfish, this is one prefix of selfish, just s, which is this node. This node corresponds to se, which is the second prefix. This node corresponds to sel, which is the third prefix, and so on. So every prefix corresponds to one node, and every node corresponds to one prefix. So if someone asks me, for example, is there a word here that has sel as a prefix? I just search for sel, I just don't add the end of word character at the end of it. And when I find SEL, I say yes. I can also count, right? So here's the thing. When I'm inserting, at every node, I can also have a counter, which basically tells me how many times did I insert something at this node and its descendants, right? And then, so for example, when I'm adding cell, I would have my counters like this, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And then when I add selfish, all of these increase. They become 2, 2, 2, 2, but then this F becomes 1, and so on. So every time that I'm adding something, I can just keep a counter at each one of my vertices. Remember how many times I've seen them when I was adding strings. And then if I look at the counter at SE, that would tell me how many strings have SE as a prefix. Okay. So again, this also solves this problem in OK. Okay. What is the longest repeated substring and so on? We're not going to have better algorithms for this at this moment, but we'll continue on this. Okay, now one problem you might see here is that I'm pretty much wasting a lot of space. Right? So my runtime is kind of optimal, because whenever I was reading some word, I had to at least spend time proportional to the length of the word, because I have to read it. And I'm spending just that amount of time to also save it. So my runtime is fine. But what about my space? I'm using a lot of space here. Could I use less space than this? Well, actually, not really if you're talking asymptotically. But I can reduce the number of nodes that I have in my tree. So how many nodes do I have in this tree in the worst case? My worst case would be if none of my words share any prefix at all. And if they don't share any prefix, then I would just have one vertex for every letter. I would have O and K vertices here. Now, can that happen if I have only a limited alphabet? So let's say if my strings were only over 0 and 1, would it be possible that I still have a huge trie? Yes, actually. That can happen because I can have something like this. Let's say I have a bunch of zeros followed by a bunch of ones. And then I have one fewer zero followed by the same number of ones. And then something like this with the same number of ones, and so on. And if you see this, if you put this in a trie, you will of course have all of the zeros, but then branching out of each one of the zeros, you will have a lot of ones. Okay, so let me show this to you. So this is what I want to say. I want to say I have a bunch of strings, and let's say that my first string has a lot of zeros. So let's say k zeros followed by k ones. Okay. My second string has k minus 1 zeros followed by k ones. And then the next one has k minus 2 zeros followed by k ones, and so on. If I create a trie out of this, so for the first one, I'm going to draw my trie in a weird way because I want it to fit. So I will have a bunch of zeros. This is my root, okay? I will have a bunch of zeros. So there are k of these. And then I have the ones. And there are k of these. Right? But then in my second string, I have k minus 1 zeros and then k ones. So it starts from here and gets all of these ones. And then in the next one, I have k minus 2 and so on. So as you see, I will have a whole grid basically here. So I will have all of these edges as well in my trie. And this is bad because this is k by k. It's like a k squared. Okay. So yeah, the fact that common prefixes are saved only once can actually save us a lot in space, but in the worst case, it will save us almost nothing, or just a constant factor. Okay, but we have this thing called a compressed trie, and let's see what a compressed trie does. So the idea in a compressed trie is that I want to have a trie, but I want to have fewer vertices. So let me just copy my trie from here. This one really looks ugly. This is my trie. Now, if you look here, there are a lot of vertices that have only one child. So there is no reason for them to be vertices at all, right? So for example, I have this whole path here, SEL. I could just have one edge instead of this whole path. So I could create something like this. I could say, I take this SEL and I just merge it into one edge. So I will have one edge. And now the label of my edge is not just one letter, it's the whole string, it's SEL, right? And then it has two children. One side is F. On this side, I have L sharp, but again, I can just merge these two. So I can just have one node here, and I can write L sharp on this edge. Now, I can do the same thing for F. So I can merge all of these. I can merge all of these. And of course, this one is merged already. So F can have a child here that is just sharp. It can have another child, and this child is ish sharp. And then it can have another child, which is labeled less sharp. Okay, so I could compress my trie to look like this. The only difference is that now, when I'm traversing an edge, I'm basically traversing several letters at the same time. Now, does this help? Does this actually take asymptotically less memory? No. Why? Because even though I have fewer vertices, I'm now saving these labels which are much longer. So if I'm saving a label of length k, that's taking k units of memory. So in terms of saving memory, I mean, I have fewer nodes, so maybe I'm reducing my memory by a constant factor, but it's not going to make a big difference. But what about in terms of saving nodes? Actually, how many nodes can I have? So here's the thing. Let's just forget that n and k were different. And let's say I have n strings of length at most n. So I'm going to use n both for the maximum length of my string and also for the number of strings. So here, it was possible that I had n squared nodes, even if my alphabet was very small, right? Or in general, I could have nk nodes. And that's the example that we had here, the example of the grid. But how many nodes can I have in a compressed trie? So in order to answer that, I have to go back to my trie and I have to show you something else. Because I added this sharp character at the end, every one of my words is now saved at a leaf of this trie, right? And also every leaf corresponds to exactly one word, because all the leaves have an edge with sharp going into them, so all the leaves are at the end of a word. Okay, so my number of leaves is exactly equal to the number of words. Now, when I do this compression, I'm not changing the number of leaves. I can again do the same argument. I can say every leaf has a label that ends with a sharp instead of just being exactly a sharp, right? And every label that ends with a sharp is also a leaf, and so on. So the number of leaves is basically the same as the number of words, which we said is n. Okay. Great. But now, in the normal trie, if I had a bound on the number of leaves, it wouldn't give me a bound on the number of nodes, because I could have things like this. This is like, I could have a huge path that contributes only one leaf. But here, every node that is not a leaf has at least 2 children. Because if it had less than 2 children, I would just merge it up, right? So this is a binary tree. It's not a complete binary tree, but okay, no, not binary. It's at least binary tree in the sense that every more than binary tree, I don't know. Okay, let me be more specific. Every non-leaf node here has at least 2 children. Okay, so what is the number of non-leaf nodes? It's at most n. Now, why is that? Just look at it as a DSU problem for a second. Suppose that I have a DSU on my leaves. Initially, all of my leaves are in different sets. And then this node is like a merge operation that is merging these 3. Okay, this node is like a merge operation that is merging this one, and so on, exactly like a DSU data structure, right? So if I start with n different sets, how many times can I merge? I can merge at most n minus 1 times, right? And eventually I will just have one set. So, and every merge corresponds to one of these internal nodes or the non-leaves. So the number of non-leaves is also in O of n. It's at most n minus 1, but I only care that it's in O of n. So the total number of nodes in a compressed trie is On. Now, this doesn't really make me happy, because even though the number of nodes is small, because the labels are long, I have to potentially save a label of length k at each one of the edges. So it's still going to take onk. It's going to take onk space. And I mean, you can also create it in onk time. You can create this by either first creating the uncompressed version and doing the compression, or you can just do your insertions on the compressed version. It's very similar. You have to just be careful. Sometimes you're traversing like half of the label on some edge, and then you have to cut that edge into. Okay, great. So until this point, we have found a way to create a trie that has very few vertices, but unfortunately, it's still taking a long time to create, and it's using a lot of space. Now, in the next session, we will see that this is actually useful, because in some cases, I don't have to save the labels. And in the next session, we will see that when I don't have to save the labels, when I can just have, let's say, a pointer instead of each one of the labels, then this is great, because this is giving me all of these operations, and I could create it in On, and then I can query the existence of a string in OK, and I can add new strings also in OK. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow.